Hello and welcome back to another miniature game terrain project. Today we are making buildings. This one is specifically for Rangers of Shadowdeep, but it's going to be just a generic, small, fantasy medieval building. I'm going to be able to use it in Warhammer and things like that, so it's going to be that half timber construction. The thing about Rangers of Shadowdeep is that you can actually go in the buildings, but I don't want to spend all the time to actually go and make the interior of the building. So I'm going to take one of these old D&D dungeon tiles that I think I got in the 80s and are my favorite kind of tiles. So the idea is when a model goes into the building, I'm going to set this off to the side and that'll represent the interior. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a base for the building. So I already know the size. It's going to be about 4 inches by 6 inches. So I'm just going to draw out a little wider area than that, maybe give it a like 3/8 of an inch on each side. And I'm going to use hardboard. I like hardboard for bases for larger projects. It doesn't warp as easily as something like cardboard, and it's still reasonably easy to work with. You do have to break out the tools. I've got my jigsaw here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out that, then I'm going to take the Dremel with the sandpaper bit, and I'm going to just smooth down the edges. I'm going to bevel down the edges to give a more gradual transition, a nice rounder edge. And I have some good news for you. I've actually already done it. Sorry, I didn't want to wait for doing the video, so I've actually done this. I actually did 2. I'm going to make 2 of these buildings. So there you go, that's what it looks like when it's all cut out. And you've got the nice beveled edge. So the next thing that I'm going to do, sorry about all this, I'll catch you up, is I'm going to take foam board. Foam core. Just regular, cheap stuff. These are just scraps that I have lying around. For modern buildings, I like to use nice, new, flat pieces of good foam board, but these are medieval buildings, so if they're a little warped, a little bent, a little wonky, I think that would be okay. So, I'm going to take out, ruler. This one's got a right angle. I normally don't trust the right angles on these, but again, it's a medieval building, so I don't really care. Pencil, I already know the dimensions. So the front piece, the facade and the back of the building, they are going to be 4 inches wide. They are going to be 4 3/4 inches high, and then the edge comes up 2 inches, and then it cuts in to the angled roof. And then the sides are going to be 6 inches minus the thickness of the foam board. So it'll be about 5 5/8 inches wide. So I'm going to draw that out. I'm going to take out the X-Acto, cut those out. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, again, I lied. I've already drawn those out. So here we have the side sections, 2 by 5 5/8. And then these I've drawn out there. And yeah, sure enough, again, I've already cut them out with the X-Acto. But we're all cut up now. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take the base. I honestly haven't done this yet. So we're just going to put this here. We're going to put these, line it up. I don't see any reason not to glue it on the base immediately, And I'm just going to glue it with regular white glue. I could use hot glue, save some time. I don't have to worry about covering up the detail. But, I don't know. Generally, I just like using the white glue, so I'm probably just going to use that. Whatever works for you. I'll check in after I've done that. So here we have our basic house shape all glued together, ready for the next step. And like I said, I'm going for this half timber Tudor style construction. So I'm going to take these coffee stir sticks, and I'm just going to start putting them, cutting them, putting them alongside, and just framing out those half timbers. Frame out a door, some windows with shutters, that kind of thing. Just trying to follow how they were actually made, or at least try and simulate it. I also have these long matchsticks that I got a long time ago. They might be good for some support posts coming out, maybe where they would logically go. The other thing I'm going to do is a chimney. Now, the last time I made a chimney for one of these buildings, I just used a section of this cheap foam, peeled off the paper, and then carved in a little stone pattern and stuck it on the back. and then made a slightly larger bit for where it sticks up out of the roof. That actually turned out being a little bit too thin for my taste. It looked like kind of a wimpy chimney. So I'm gonna carve a bigger one out of this insulation foam, this XPS, extruded polystyrene foam. And so I'm just gonna take a nice bread knife and just chop it down to about the size that I want, and then carve in little stone details with a pen. And then I'll glue that all on, and I'll show you guys how it's going. I'm back, and as you can see, I've glued on the little half timbers onto the sides of the building using those coffee stirrers. And that's all nicely done, but I wanted to talk to you guys about it. I thought I would just do a series of pictures showing the progress on this, but it was a little bit, well, I'll get into it in a minute. Could you just take these coffee stir sticks and glue them however you like on the building? Yes, absolutely you can. Get yourself a nice Tudor style pattern and you're off and running. And is anyone going to criticize you for not doing the architecture exactly right? No, no one is. If they even notice, who's to say? There's so much variety in how these houses were constructed and so many complicated joins for how people would have made the facing and all that, that you'd probably be fine any way you did it. But I'm going to show you a picture of how I originally set this thing out. And as you can see, I've got the corner timbers going all the way up to the roof line, and then the center sections in between those, and then the roof line ones after that. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, that probably isn't right. That probably doesn't make sense. So as I thought about it, I'm going to take out these Jenga blocks here. This is how, and again, I am not an expert on medieval architecture or anything like that, but this is what makes the most sense to me. Chances are when they went to make these buildings, they took the corner posts, right? They just made big timbers like that. And then on top of those, they stuck the beams that went across. That just kind of makes sense to me, the weight that it would support the weight a little bit more easily. So something, I'm going to stack them up like that. They would probably join them a little bit. So then you've got the beams across like there, sitting on top of the corner posts that go up. And then on top of those, you probably put the beams that make the roof line. So I feel like I did it wrong initially. And so I went and I actually peeled off all, not all of them, but a bunch of the ones that I'd already done. And I went and fixed it. So if you guys, I believe, want to make your buildings a little bit more accurately, and judging from the pictures, this looks like how you want to do it. You want to take the ones either dividing the floors or the horizontal ones towards the top. And you want to put those on first. So put on a big strip along the top. And then after that, you put the ones going down, the ones on the corner. And then after that, you can put the ones on the roof line. And then all the ones sort of in between, because I believe this is like they just set up a frame of these large timbers and then they fill it in with stuff, wattle and daub or brick or plaster and wood or whatever you've got. So that's what I think. I haven't seen anyone actually describing the system for making these, but it looks the most reasonable and the most realistic. So a couple of notes for the door. That's just more of those coffee stirrers glued together in this pattern here. Then I took the matchsticks and like that. They're a little bit thicker, and so I made a frame out of those. The shutters are actually, they're just these little wider, little thicker popsicle sticks, craft popsicle sticks. And that's what I made those out of, just framed out with more coffee stirrers. I turned this one on its side to make a little windowsill. Add a couple of those in like that. So, as you can see, I've also added in the chimney. Now, when you cut the chimney with a knife as opposed to using a hot wire cutter, you do end up with kind of a rougher edge. So I'm going to take a sanding sponge real quick, and I'm just going to sand that down a little bit. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start drawing in some of the stone pattern for the chimney. So there I've sanded down the rougher sides just a little bit. I also sanded down the corners, the edges, because I'm going to make this more like, I don't know, like river rock, just a little bit more irregular, not cut stone blocks this time. I did stone blocks the last time I made one of these chimneys. It is okay. I'm going to try it a little bit differently this time. I didn't need to be too careful with this. I didn't need to make everything perfectly flat and smooth. First off, I'm going to be putting a texture pattern on this. Second off, anything that looks too bad when I'm all done, I can just try and patch up with some of that spackle or filler. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a pen and I'm going to start just drawing out a little stone pattern here. I'm not going to worry about making this too precise. I'm going to try and make it a little irregular, blocks of different sizes. Whoops, kind of wasn't paying attention to how the camera was pointed. Sorry about that. I've been off to the side a little bit. Just going through. Probably can't really do this wrong. Well, maybe you can. I'll see. So, yeah, when you got a pattern that you like, I'm just going to press a little bit harder and just carve in this stonework on the whole thing. It's not a very big part of the building. This probably won't take us very long, but that's just generally the idea. Go until you're satisfied, and then when we come back, we'll see what the next thing is going to be. I've completed the stone pattern on the chimney, as you can see there. I've also gone and dug out a little section at the very top. And so now we're going to add some spackle or some all-purpose filler, and we're going to add a little texture to the walls. You could leave them plain if you want, but I think they look better with a little texture. And I have not had much success with textured paint. To me, textured paint just kind of looks like exactly what it is, which is paint with a bit of sand mixed in. So I like using this stuff here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a really bad old paintbrush, of which I have a lot because I am hard on my brushes. And I'm going to get this nice and thin. And I'm just going to spread it around inside the big squares. And it's going to be hard to see because, of course, the squares... Well, let's use the dark squares. That'll show up a little bit better. I'm going to take a bunch of this. We're just going to spread it really thin. We don't need to cover the whole thing. We're just putting down a pattern of texture onto the surface. When it's really wet, your texture will look kind of smooth. It'll be bumpy. Sometimes, if it's too smooth, I'll come back in after it's dried a little bit and just dab it a bit with the paintbrush just to get some harder edges and a little rougher texture. So that's really all there is to it. I'm also going to take some of this filler and I'm just going to fill in some of the gaps, maybe where the seams don't quite line up on the balsa wood. Definitely over here you can see I've got some gaps between the base and the chimney, and just anything that's a little bit, just doesn't look good enough. I'm also going to add a little bit of filler to the edge of the base itself. I think I made this edge a little bit too small. I think I could have made that base a little bit bigger. So yeah, just adding more organic texture to the whole thing. And because I'm doing very thin coats in most of the stuff, it won't take very long to dry. And that's all there is to it. I'll come back in a little bit when we're ready for the roof. So we're a little bit further on this project. We've got our spackle all through the sides and along the edges of our house. And it's time to start on the roof. We're getting close. So took just some regular cereal box cardboard, and I cut out a chunk to fit the roof. So measured out how long the edge was, how wide it was, doubled it, turned it over, cut a just a thin score with the X-Acto blade down there. Folded it. I like to use the straight edge to give myself a nice fold. Just slid it on top of the roof like this. When I found out how big that was, then I marked out a spot for the chimney. And then that all fits like that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to glue that down. Now, I didn't do great cutting this chimney. It wasn't perfect, so I might have to go and take a little extra XPS foam and just cover that up. I thought maybe I would cover it up with the tiles that I'm going to do in a second, but looks like it's going to need a little bit of correction there. But that's the roof like that. Now, tiles. Warhammer buildings have tiles. I know I'm using this for Rangers of Shadow Deep, but it's also going to be for Warhammer. So, went back to my cardboard and I cut a whole bunch of strips like this. This is about 1/4-inch strips. Doesn't really matter how thick you make it. And I wasn't measuring this carefully or anything because the tiles are going to be a little bit irregular, a little bit haphazard. And then I just took scissors and I cut a whole bunch of these out. And I'm just going to go through the laborious process of running a strip of white glue and then sticking a row of tiles on at the bottom, then glue another row, put down another run of white glue, gluing the next row on so that they overlap a little bit, and just going on and on until I've got the whole thing covered with tiles. And the last ones are going to have to be a little bit longer and they're going to get folded to make the top row. And then this will be, I guess I still need a couple of details. I need a handle for the door, and I think that's about it. So yeah, I'll get going on that and I'll check in a bit. As you can see, I have finished up the roof. That was a long process, cutting out all those little squares and then gluing them on layer by layer. Just run a bead of glue, stick on each of those little tiles, run a little bit of glue, stick on each of the tiles. The thing I like about it is that with all the glue, it warped the roof line, which maybe isn't great for modern buildings, but for medieval building, I do like that there's some bowing and waving on the roof now. Just a couple other details to go over. I went and watered down some white glue and I coated it all over the chimney, the XPS foam, because I am going to spray paint it next and I don't want the spray paint to dissolve the foam. I also took some more glue and I just ran some along the edge and just sprinkled a little sand on here just to give it a little extra texture. And finally, I went and added a door handle. So there's a couple ways of making door handles. You can go into your bits box and you can find one, but I've actually started to run out of those. You can take a little piece of paper clip and you can bend it into shape. It works okay, I've done that before, but they do tend to be a little wonky. They're not the easiest thing to shape. So I actually did something a little bit different this time. I took a piece of round sprue and I just cut 2 thin sections out of it. So I got 2 discs of plastic and I cut a little notch out of the top center of one of them, and then I slid the other disc into that notch. So just one disc fit into the other. I did have to file down the sharp edges on those, but I think that worked out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. I think it'll paint up okay. And speaking of paint, we're going to hit it with some black spray paint. I'm not going to use the really nice GW Chaos Black stuff because, first off, it's a large surface area to be covering in that expensive paint. Next off, some of these materials like the cardboard and the balsa wood, they really soak up a lot of paint. Oh, excuse me, I'm not actually using balsa wood on this. I'm using coffee stirrers and popsicle sticks. But you get the idea. Sometimes it just soaks up too much paint for the expensive stuff. So, I'm going to go out, hit that with the Rust-Oleum stuff, and then we'll be back for the regular painting.
Open up the champagne, pop. It's my house, come on, turn it up. Hear a knock on the door and the night begins. Cause we've done this before, so you come on in. Make yourself at my home, tell me where you been. Pour yourself something cold, baby, cheers to this. Sometimes you gotta stay in.
So I'm getting a little ahead of myself on the painting of this thing. As you can see, I've already done the brown. The reason I started with the brown, normally I would start with the innermost details, which would be these wall sections, since the boards really sit on top of those. But in this case, the wall section, I'm going to leave the area around the edges darker. So I'm only going to be highlighting in the inside. It's going to be a little bit easier for me to paint. And if I start with the brown, I can get as sloppy as I want. I don't have to worry about picking out all these little details carefully so I don't get any paint on the wall sections. So anyway, I'm going to paint everything the exact same way. And that is, I'm going to start with a base coat. I'm going to wash it with a darker color, and then I'm going to do 5 layers of highlights, usually by dry brushing. This is a little excessive. You don't really need to do this much. You can do much fewer highlights. You can go much brighter, much earlier. In a lot of cases, you can even skip the wash. But what can I say? I'm kind of a creature of habit, and this is my process. So for the brown, the formula that I use is I start with burnt umber mixed with black for the undercoat, then thin down some straight black and do a wash of that. Then do a dry brush highlight of burnt umber, dry brush highlight of brown iron oxide, layer of spice brown, then add in a little trail tan for the next dry brush highlight, and then for the final highlight dry brush, I mix in even more trail tan. So that's going to be, that's how I did the wood. As you can see, I've actually started filling in the wall sections. I'm going to start with territorial beige. When all that's done, I'm going to go back to the brown iron oxide with a wash. Then we're going to go and just do another highlight dry brush of the territorial beige. I'm going to make it kind of thick. I'm actually going to do a fairly thick highlight dry brush in the center of these. Then I'm going to go with cloudberry tan, over to trail tan, sandstone, and ivory.
Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play that music too loud. Show me what you do now. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Welcome to my house. Morning comes and you know that you wanna stay. Close the blinds, let's pretend that the time has changed. Keep our clothes on the floor, open up champagne. Let's continue tonight, come on, celebrate. That's how we do. Sometimes you gotta stay in, and you know where I live. Yeah, you know what we is. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play that music too loud. Show me what you do now. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Welcome to my house.
It's been a while, and I've been a little haphazard as to what I've been recording, so let me catch you up. Last you saw, I believe I did the brown and the wall color, and so then I just went and finished the rest of it. So you can see I painted the shutters red. I started with barn red mixed with black, went up to brown red, red iron oxide, and then mixed that up to adobe. I've got the stonework, started that off with charcoal, then went up to rain gray, then up to drizzle gray. At the end, it seemed a little bit too light. Now, I would have done this anyway, but I went through and just picked out some areas with a burnt umber wash, just dirty up some of the stuff, especially around the baseline. But it still seemed a little too light. So I actually went in some areas with another black wash. And of course, in the chimney area itself, I went in with like a black wash and then a little dry brush just to soot that thing up a little bit. The little door handle, just black plus silver, highlighted up a little bit. Then we did the roof. The roof I painted straight black, Then I dry brushed up through Midnight, which is a very dark blue, and then up through some of these other blues. What do we got here? Navy blue, and then added in this Ocean Reef blue, and it still wasn't getting light enough. I wanted it to be a dark blue, but I'm also trying to match it to another terrain piece that I did. So I ended up adding a little white to it, and in the end I may have gone a little bit too light with the whole thing, but it's close. You know, I have a little notebook, and whenever I do a new color, I like to write down the formula of what I used to get that color. And I often forget. Sometimes I'm just, I'm busy with a model, I'll write this down later, and then I never get around to it. And so I don't exactly remember the roof formula I used that first time. I may have, instead of highlighting with white, I may have done a very light gray or something. But the painting is all done, and I'm about to hit it with this top coat stuff, this varnish sealant stuff. And it does tend to knock the color down a bit. It tends to make it a little bit darker. That'll be the next thing that I do. And then the last thing that I'm gonna do on this model is I'm gonna take some thinned down white glue. I'm just gonna add some spots around the base and add some green flock. And the idea there is that I want this to blend in with a couple of the boards that I have. So if I use a rocky board, it'll be okay. Urban, it'll be okay. Grassy, it'll be okay. It'll have some ground material that'll have it make sense for it being where it is. So that's the last thing I do. The next time you see me, this is gonna be all done. And here we have the project all done. Overall, I think I'm very happy with it. I like the way it's painted up. It goes with the other building that I've created here. I do need to make one more for the Rangers of Shadow Deep scenario that I was going to play. I'm going to make that one a little bit more elaborate. I think I'm going to take a block of 2-inch XPS foam, and I'm going to make a second level that's going to be brickwork. I like that Warhammer buildings are all 2 inches because it makes using just a chunk of XPS foam pretty convenient for that. A couple of thoughts about this one in general. First off, I think it's too big. It's 4 inches by 6 inches. For a little cottage, I think it's too large. I could have saved some time and materials and made it smaller. Second off, I think it's a little bit too plain. I could have done some details, especially on the roof, like one of those windows and a little extra roof detail there. Maybe some stuff along the sides. I'm happy enough with the shutters. I'm happy enough with the door and the handle that I crafted. I'm probably going to do that in the future. The chimney looks fine. Yeah, the roof could just use a little extra, and if I were to do it again, I would make it smaller. Even 4x4 I think would look okay. I didn't match the roof color exactly, but I think it's close enough for now. I'll keep experimenting with it a little bit. And just because I don't like talking about things that I'm going to do, I want to prove that I actually went and made that second house real quick. So using some of the things I learned from the first house, like the plain roofs, I went and made these little details on here. Those were actually a lot simpler than I thought. Just cutting out a triangle of foam board and then measuring and cutting the roof parts to match. I think it goes a long way to making the whole building a bit more interesting. You can see I did something very similar right here. I cut out a 5-sided piece of foam board, stuck it on the side like that, and then made the supporting pieces. I also added in the matchstick supports on the top there and the bottoms there. Like I said I was gonna do, I just took a 2-inch block of XPS foam and made a lower level, just carved in the brick pattern like that. I also, out of popsicle sticks and the long matchsticks, set up these little windows, glued them onto a small piece of cardboard, cut out the cardboard, then carved out a chunk of the XPS foam to set those in, and that's how I made those. And some things that I didn't learn was, again, this is way too large. This is much bigger than it needed to be, but you know, I made the first one that big, so might as well make the second one that big. Again, I was matching it to those dungeon tiles. Again, I liked the door handle, made that one again. The door frame is just a little bit different. I took a little sliver of the XPS foam and carved the doorway out like that. And then the doorway I made rounded, just like before, just glued the sticks together and then cut them out in that arc. Set that in. And I think I was a little light on the details for the first building, so I actually went into one of the Games Workshop kits and added some little bits to go on the top. I could have done more, but again, I made my bases a little bit small, and I am a little bit stingy with the actual pieces. So there that is. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them below. I'll see you on the next one.